Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another another episode in the series on Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra with myself and Fernando Raul. Today we're going to be talking about chapters 8 through 11, kind of again, like a sort of wide range of topics discussed in these few chapters. So as usual, I'm going to share the screen and we're going to take a look at these. All right, here we go.
So basically, we start with chapter 8, and in chapter 8, what we have here is it's kind of a weird chapter because he kind of says the same thing two times. We're talking here about the sign aspects, and this is very, very curious because sign aspects, we're seeing them in this book before planetary aspects.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting because in a lot of schools of astrology in India, sign aspects are not so much emphasized as planetary aspects.
Right.
But in Parashara, sign aspects are mentioned first than planetary aspects. So that's a very interesting thing. And as I said, he first starts to say, the basic rules about, cardinal signs aspecting stationary signs, or how do you say it? Shtira.
Fixed signs. Yeah, it's all right
signs.
here. Santanam has put it in, this right here. And yeah.
And then he mentions in the next shloka that when planets are in these rashis, well, they aspect. But it's kind of weird how he translated, because he kind of mentions planetary aspects, but it's still rashi aspects. Because people have to remember that planetary aspects in Jyotish are basically like aspects, mathematical aspects based on points, right? While Rashi aspects are areas aspecting other areas.
Sort of. I mean, not originally. Like we saw in Yavanajataka that it was purely a sign-based thing. And later in this text, he gives a precise sort of pointing degree-based system for the aspects. So I believe that was a later development. But
no. What I mean is that Rashi aspects are aspects that are area to area.
Yeah.
While planetary aspects are basically...
Oh, they're one way, usually.
Yes.
Unless you have the opposition. But yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's curious here because it's like, for those who are watching this and don't know, like he's talking about Rashi Drishti, which is basically given in Jaimini Sutras, and it's the idea that all cardinal signs aspect all fixed signs except the one adjacent, and vice versa for fixed signs aspecting cardinals except the one adjacent, meaning, second from it or 12th from it. And then all mutable signs mutually aspect one another. And Santanam gives some commentary on this, which I am going to have to disagree with, though I'm definitely not as learned as him. But
I didn't read the commentary.
He basically says that, like, somewhere in this commentary, he explains that, like, even though we call them Jaimini aspects sometimes because they're more associated with the Jaimini Sutras, that Parashara is the originator of them because they're here in Parashara. But that seems highly unlikely given the fact that, as far as from what I know, Jaimini Sutras is actually dated to be older than this text here. But not only that, Jaimini Sutras is coded Sanskrit, and the elements of Jaimini that we find in Parashara like this are not coded Sanskrit. So,
and they sometimes differ from the Jaimini origin.
Yeah. So it's just that idea is questionable. I mean, again, this is more of the mythological kind of idea that, this is Parashara, and since Jaimini was a student of, Parashara's son or whatever, or Parashara's disciple, something like that. Down here he talks about it, the disciple of Veda Vyasa.
Veda Vyasa, yeah. He was the one who wrote the Mahabharata, yeah.
Right, okay, yeah. So, we're getting kind of out there again, like, and for those of you who haven't seen our intro video, like, please watch it, because we talked about, I'm going to screw up the word again,
Pseudoepigrapha.
Pseudoepigrapha, yeah, that's it. Where you basically say this book is by such and such a person, like Aristotle or Socrates or Plato in Greece, and
And you know,
and it's not. It's it's
yeah.
Anyway,
We didn't mention something very important that we should have mentioned in the introduction, and that was that Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra stands out from the other classics because Parashara in Vedic tradition is considered a Maharishi, right?
Yeah.
He's like more close to the Saptarishis and more close to like the ancient sages, while other books like Shintana's I don't know, Brihat, who was wrote by Barahamihira, Savari, Paladipika, were written by people who were just normal astrologers. Like maybe we are in a way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this, I think people, like I said, I think people have become enamored by the fact that it says it's by Parashara, and have treated it as like some superhuman feat. And that's totally fine, as we already discussed a lot in our intro video. But anyway, then he gives the aspectual diagram, which is basically just this South Indian chart, as far as I can tell. He's explaining how to draw this out. So anyway, I think we're on to the next chapter.
Sure. This is an interesting chapter. This is what it's called in Sanskrit, Balarishtas. These are basically combinations for short life or like a difficult life. Yeah. And he first starts talking about the Balarishta to the child, to the baby. And then he starts talking about how that combination at birth can also affect the mother. And then he goes to the father. And what he does, I've read this chapter before. And what he does is like, he usually goes to yogas that are kind of obvious in terms of like the 6th, the 8th, the 12th positions, hemming. But he sometimes also uses the maracas, which are not necessarily used in Hellenistic astrology, which is the 2nd and the 7th, which are killer houses.
Right.
But he sometimes uses other types of arrangements that are not as common or as obvious as one might think. He usually uses the 9th, the 3rd, which are obviously apoclimas, which are cadent
falling
houses.
Away from an angle.
Yes, which is like one of they're not the worst houses, but they are
they're weak. They're considered in terms of like a strength thing, they're behind the scenes, so they're not as like they're not as powerful in that sense.
But they're not as well disposed as Kendras or Panafaras. Exactly.
Right. And then the 9th house becomes kind of the exception because it's that trine, and it's considered highly auspicious, but I would still say it's considered to be like, essentially weaker in terms of planets placed there. They don't have as much power to just do whatever they're going to do. And we do find, I feel like I was just reading this. I feel like there was something that hinted at that in this, like at all the cadent houses being weak, or the 9th house being a little bit
Did
weak.
You write down the chapter?
No, I didn't. Oh, well. I know, terrible, right? Yeah. And I call myself Virgo rising. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, we might stumble upon it. We might not.
I mean, we don't have to go one by one, but I would strongly recommend people to understand this chapter because you will realize what arishtas are. Because arishtas are something that is
I found it.
Okay, great. What?
Yeah, that was easy. It's 23.
Okay.
So, oops. The lifespan of the child will be either 2 months or 6 months only. Sorry, it's like flashing for some reason. It's glitching out. If all planets devoid of strength are relegated to apoklima houses, 3rd, 6th, 9th, and 12th. So that's an extreme case. Like he's not focusing on the 9th, right? But he is implying that, an abundance of those houses creates weakness. And that makes sense.
Yeah, and when arishtas happen, people have to realize it's not only having, your ascendant lord in the 6th and the 8th or the 12th. There got to be other factors to find confluence. There's got to be a negative dignity. There's got to be hemming. There's got to be aspects
right.
from malefic planets. Maybe some parivartanas with other dushtanas without having a viparit. But the thing is that people have to realize that this chapter is good because you can extrapolate why the dushtanas are difficult, why the apoklimas are weak. And people, and as we go on, you will realize through this chapter that the 3rd and the 11th, which is a mistake that sometimes many people commit, is that the 3rd and the 11th are not terrible houses. They are bad houses when it comes to yoga, Raj Yoga judgment, right? But they're not a Dushtana type negative. They're more negative in the way of how you combine planets to have greatness in your life. And in this chapter, you will see that although he mentions the 3rd sometimes, there's basically no mention of the 3rd and 11th as yoga breakers, as we're going to see in the Yoga Karka chapters. But, Dushtanas are difficult, the 6th, the 8th, and the 12th, and this chapter shows why. And then he goes on and he once again mentions later on how this is going to affect the mother, and this is how this is going to affect the father. And then he starts talking about, how the luminaries with the nodes are difficult,
Yeah. And I wanted to just mention a few shlokas that stood out to me, like 33. If Mars and Saturn are together in an angle with reference to the moon and occupy one and the same Navamsha, the child will have 2 mothers, yet it will be short-lived. And I actually know someone I recently met who has not exactly this condition, right, but very close to this. And they didn't have 2 mothers exactly, but it was like their grandmother sort of like stole them from their mother. And then raised them, and then later on they like reconnected with their mothers. So it's really interesting, like, again, how accurate these things can be. And again, like, I think always give wiggle room with this stuff. Like, don't look for this exact configuration, because you're almost never going to find something this precise. But if like several of the conditions are fulfilled, right, then you'll get something similar. I've seen this time and time again with these old books. It's really interesting. I also thought it was fascinating how in 37, he writes that if the sun is in the 7th while Mars is in the 10th and Rahu is in the 12th, that this is this may not cause the death of the father, but it may mean that the father is not present, is not able to leaves the family. It's not really too clear. Like, he might be talking about death, but I think I would need to know the Sanskrit to be sure, because it just says remote possibility of one's father sustaining. And I just found this interesting because, like, as we're going to see in chapter 11, I believe, like, the 10th is associated with the father along with the 9th.
Yes.
So this text gives both for the father, which I think is very interesting. And
I have an explanation for that when we get there.
Yeah, me too. And I think it can work in practice. But what I liked about this too is that, like, theoretically, he's implying Mars being in an angle from the sun as well, even though Mars isn't aspecting that sun by like a normal, Jyotish aspect. There's kind of this implication that it just sounds very Hellenistic to me. Like, it's reminiscent of, okay, you got Mars in the 4th from the sun. That's really destabilizing for the father, or something like that. So, and
in this chapter, I forgot, he kind of mentions several times that idea of the sun in the 7th. The sun dying down during during sunset, right? Sunset, yes. Yeah. During sunset, which kind of alludes to the idea of the father just dying in the 7th, just going down before twilight. But man, we can understand a lot of things by these arrangements, and definitely there's a Hellenistic influence here, without a doubt. And I think,
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's not in this chapter. I think it's in the next chapter. We'll also see some interesting. I found it. Okay, well, I'll wait till we get to that.
And we have to take into consideration, now that you mentioned something, the idea of how the square aspect in Hellenistic astrology is sometimes, well, it's usually seen as a hard aspect, as a negative aspect to Mars, or the energy of Mars. While in Jyotish, squares are sometimes seen as negative, but usually are seen as reinforcements of the chart, specifically if they occur in Kendras.
Yeah, well, what's so interesting is like what we see in Hellenistic astrology is that like the later you get, the more negative the opposition and the square become. It seems like the later in the tradition, and so, but there are passages even by those same authors where like Jupiter squaring the sun is like auspicious. Jupiter and Venus squaring is fairly auspicious and stuff. Like it's not always considered as auspicious as a trine, but I think it's sort of questionable to make those associations right off the bat. I think that it's just that one is more active, one requires more work and effort, and one is more passive and requires less work and effort. And so the idea was more that like benefics do well in soft aspect and malefics do more harm in hard aspect, whereas it's vice versa when you reverse that, right? Benefics are less powerful in hard aspect and malefics are less powerful to be malefic or to be harsh in soft aspect, But I think that, I don't know, like what I keep seeing, what I keep intuitively feeling as I study these two traditions side by side and attempt to kind of integrate them is that it's like more of it has to be like the full context has to be seen, because like Saturn in the ninth from some other planet in trine can actually be very negative because it's in the ninth from that planet, so it's like it could be obscuring that planet's dharma, so it's kind of like, I don't know, like there's a fine line between houses and aspects in both these traditions. But yeah, we'll see that more and more in this text as we go on. And the last thing I wanted to mention too, before we move on from this chapter, is just like how he does mention the Navamsha a little bit.
Yes, he has mentioned it. Yeah.
Shloka is like, 40, I think it is. So for example, real quick, like we can see if Sun aspected by Saturn and be in Aries, Scorpio, Navamsha, right? So not in the Rashi chart, but in the Navamsha, then the father would have given up the family before the birth of the child or would have passed away. This is really reminiscent of how the Navamsha might have been used in Yavanajataka. We're seeing it's obviously for much more than marriage, even though Parashara or whoever wrote this says, oh, it's for marriage. We're already seeing these little shlokas that are like hinting that, oh, you can get some like hidden predictive elements from Navamsha.
Yeah. And another thing that I want to mention, two things before we finish this chapter, is that there's a debate here between, what is Parashara alluding when he says aspects here? We just mentioned squares, but some people say these are also Rashi aspects.
Oh, right.
And sure. This is kind of tricky because we just had a chapter where he explains Rashi aspects, but he doesn't explain planetary aspects, right?
Right.
So we kind of have to conclude three possibilities here. A, he's referring to planetary aspects only. B, he's referring to Rashi aspects only. Or C, he's referring both to Rashi and planetary aspects.
Yeah, that's true. I would say, like, my experience is that you can actually use either one, but my experience is it's better to stick to one at a time. So if I do more of the Jaimini type of astrology, I just ignore the other types of aspects. But if I'm doing this type of astrology, if I'm doing more the standard stuff, Hellenistic or Yavanajataka Parashara aspects, then I just stick to those, because otherwise, like, it starts to be really confusing where you're like, well, these planets are in a 6-8 relationship, but according to Jaimini aspects, they would be aspecting. And that's, and so it starts to become like this nebulous thing. And I don't think anyone's going to have great success doing that personally, but I could be wrong. I don't know.
Unless they're enlightened.
Sure. But if they're enlightened, I don't think they need to look at a chart.
Exactly. And
Cool.
I just want to mention the last shlokas 43 and 45.
Oh, yeah, great.
How he explicitly says that the sun is indicator of father and the mother is indicated by the moon. And
Yeah.
we kind of have here the same precepts of hemming and the idea of the moon being in Adushtana. This is very important because this shloka feels it's out of place a little bit, but you kind of get an idea of the Shtira karkas related to family members.
Yeah. Cool.
Do you want to continue?
Yeah.
I really like this chapter, and I would like to read
too.
it. I mean, I would like to read all of them because
Okay.
I mean they're not a lot, but I think it's very important because this chapter holds a lot of keys that I think are very important to have in order to realize, wow, this is a great horoscope, or wow, this is a strong horoscope.
Yeah.
And these are things that are not usually thought of right off the bat. For example, just let's start, with Shloka 2 here. Should
Sure.
one among Mercury, Jupiter, Venus be in angle from ascendant, all evils destroy as the sun eliminates darkness. This is the principle that benefics in Kendras are good.
Yeah.
I think they're not as good for longevity, but they're good, especially Venus, but they're good in terms of helping the Jataka overcome difficulties. And usually when you have a lot of benefics in Kendra, this is a good person. It's like a good heart person, this type of idea.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And it's also in alignment with Yavanajataka saying that Mercury, Jupiter, Venus aspecting any sign or house really helps that house. And so the four angles, like, I think what we forget a lot is that the four angles just have a tremendous amount of bearing upon like the journey and the movement of the person's life and destiny and karmas. And so anything in those angles is really grabbing the mind of the person and sort of more strongly and sort of like propelling it in a certain direction. They're like winds, against the sails or whatever.
Yeah, they're the spinal cord of the chart. You, the others, where you come from and what are you gonna do. It's basically the spinal cord. And this is a good idea because I remember reading a K.N. Rao book about his Jyotish guru, which I don't remember his name right now, but he was like one of these hardcore Indian ascetics who practice Jyotish. And he used to say that, benefics in angle are extraordinary. And, Parashara says that. Let's read. Yeah. Sure, do you want to say something else before we move on?
Well, we're going to see that here again with Jupiter in the ascendant, but I was also thinking of the Gajikasari yoga.
Definitely.
Yoga later on when he describes that. That's also based on Kendras, So Kendra, always look at the Kendras. And like if a person has lots of planets in Kendras, you have to find the strongest one as being the one that's going to influence their mind and character the most.
Yeah, but let's
anyway.
We're doing on a part here, but people have to realize, a lot of planets in Kendra can also bring other type of difficulties.
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of being spoiled to a certain degree of not knowing, that maybe a defeat in life, no matter how small it is, you're gonna take it to heart. You're not accustomed to having defeats. You're not accustomed to having obstacles in life, and when they come, you kind of feel destroyed or feel too sensitive about it. And another thing is that if you have, and this is something that I've been taught, that if you have equal amount of planets, in terms of equal amount of planets in both the 4th and the 10th, or the 1st and the 7th. You're gonna be feeling, the stress of feeling like you're not moving, that you're like stuck.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and the 3rd, he says, just a single reverential obeisance before Lord Shiva, the trident holder, frees one from all sins. A single but strong Jupiter in the ascendant will ward off all evils. That's like that's a no-brainer. The great benefic.
Yeah, and I have a great example of that is Sri Aurobindo, who was like arrested and sent to prison like a couple times for his revolutionary activities, and he's got exalted Jupiter in the 1st house, and it's just like yeah, he like at a certain point the British just couldn't touch him.
Yeah, he survived. Yeah.
Oh yeah, more than survived. It's like, yeah, everything was just removed. Jupiter. So anyway, okay, Ascendant Lord is singly capable of counteracting all evils if he is strongly placed in an angle, just as Lord Shiva, the holder of bow, destroyed the 3 cities. I love that reference. Those 3 cities, I forget the names of them, but like they're a metaphor for like the 3 like lower chakras and the lower nature. And
Okay.
like this, the story is that like these asuras like built these cities to like, you know, kind of like a Tower of Babel type thing to try to be like triumphant or something. For some reason they were like pissed, and so they were like, we're just going to build these cities, and they're like always moving constantly, and there's like a split second where they all align, and when that happens, like Shiva takes advantage of it and like destroys them with a single arrow.
Nice.
And so it becomes a metaphor for like, you know, like a single moment is also an eternity, you know, so like the right moment, everything aligns, and you know, Kundalini and all that stuff, you know, so it's a cool story.
And this also you know, is an echo of the idea that in order for Arishtas that we read before to take effect, the Ascendant Lord has to be compromised, right? The Ascendant Lord has to be in a situation where he's not doing the best job he can. Yeah. And this reaffirms it. You know, if you have difficult situation with the Dushtanas and you have a strong Ascendant Lord, you know, you're going to be able to deal with it. And this is where the idea comes from, because you're never going to have a perfect chart with these indications, or a horrible chart with the indications of the previous chapters. And that's where the judgment comes in. And, you know, Arishtas to take hold, you know, you got to have them, and you also got to have the Ascendant Lord compromised. But if the Ascendant Lord is not compromised, you can deal with them.
Yeah. Well said.
And number 5 says, all evils are destroyed if a benefics aspects the ascendant of one born during night in the bright half. Similarly, a malefic aspect be absent of one born during the daytime in the dark half.
I'm assuming bright and dark half refer to the moon, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that second part is very strange, and like I think I'd have to see that to really believe it, because that just doesn't really make sense to me, to be honest. That a malefic aspecting the ascendant during the dark half of the moon destroys all evils. I mean, maybe
he's like a bad guy that is like I don't know, like he's able to defeat because he's, I mean, the idea of the dark and the negative, I mean, you know, that's interesting, you know, that could be used. I mean,
yeah, definitely. It kind of reminds me of the Hellenistic doctrine of waxing moon doing well with Jupiter and Saturn, and waning moon doing well with Mars and Venus, although obviously it's different. But
yeah, and the idea of the waning moon being good during a night sect, and the growing moon being good during a day sect. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of in line with that in some ways. Anyway.
This is a nice one. The sun in the 12th will confer 100 years lifespan on one born in Libra ascendant, which is kind of
what the fuck?
Because if it's a Libra ascendant, that means it's the 11th lord in the 12th house, right? Yeah. So
yeah, but it's in Virgo. It has almost no Digbala, or no, it has Digbala, but it has almost no Ucha Bala, which is exaltation.
And it's kind of weird because you know, Mercury, Venus, and the Sun are always close together. So if you have this combination, you're either gonna have Mercury and Venus in Virgo, like you have an exalted planet. Maybe you have Mercury in Libra and Venus in Virgo, and then you have a Parivartana, or maybe you have, you know, Venus in Virgo and Mercury in Leo, and then you have another Parivartana. I mean, this is kind of interesting.
Oh yeah, you could have like the triple Parivartana with this.
No. Well,
yeah, I mean, what I call a triple Parivartana, where you would have, like you were saying, like let's say Sun's in Virgo, Mercury's in Libra, and then Venus is in Leo. Right, they're kind of like all feeding back into each other. It's like a feedback loop. And
that's the other type. Yeah, that's the other. Yeah, that was the other scenario I was going to say. But
I don't know. This shloka, I find it really questionable. It's
because the sun in the 12, you know, the 12 is an apoklima, so you know it's a weak house, and in principle.
Yeah, this just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, why is it even here? It's so incredibly random. Like, why doesn't he give for all the ascendants? Right? Like,
Maybe this is a special one. That's why he mentions it. I don't know.
maybe, yeah. I guess we'll have to find out if somebody has like tested this or
Do
something.
you know? Do you know that I was doing now that this is here? I was making a video comparing the Notre Dame fire with
Fire.
9/11,
Oh, cool. Yeah, you
and
showed me those
and
charts.
yeah, and the chart of 9/11 has that arrangement.
What, the Libra ascendant with the sun in
Yeah,
the 12th?
Libra ascendant with the sun in the 12th.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
I mean, it's
Huh.
it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I
I
don't
don't know.
know.
I don't know. I'm just. I'm
Yeah, what
just.
does that mean? Yeah,
I don't know.
interesting.
It's gonna be an event that's gonna last a
It's a
hundred
hundred
years. I don't.
years, maybe.
Yeah, 100,
Okay,
100 years of war, maybe.
right. Yeah, great. Okay, 7. It will prove auspicious for the mother as well as the native if Mars joins or is aspected by Jupiter.
this is a
And
this is a controversial one because I think we've talked about this one before. I mentioned it before to
briefly, yeah,
other videos. So this is the idea that Mars and Jupiter are good in relationship, but as you told me that they're not that good from a Hellenistic point of view.
it depends. Like in a trine, they're quite good, but in a square, they're not really that great. Um, I don't know. This is a questionable one for a number of reasons too. Like some people might say, oh, well, because later on he says, Mars can be used as a kataka for the mother, which
Mm-hmm.
comes from Jaimini Sutras. But I find this very questionable other than for longevity purposes, because I think Jaimini is really referring to longevity purposes, but I don't subscribe to this idea that Mars is a natural kataka for the mother. That just doesn't make sense to me. So I don't know about this sutra or sloka as well. I just don't know.
But in a way,
Yeah.
he doesn't only mention the mother. He also says to the native himself. So
That's true too. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting.
yeah.
Um, yeah. Cool.
So move on.
All right.
Though,
Go ahead.
okay, you go.
Though malefics in the 4th and 10th are a source of evil for the father, they turn auspicious if hemmed by benefics, or benefics are in trines or in angles. And and I'm just going to also jump to 9 too. If malefics are surrounded by benefics, while angles, trines are themselves benefic occupied, evils disappear soon. Not only this, evils will not follow from the Bhava's concern. This is really this is, to me, this is gold. These two shlokas, like the idea that if you have a malefic in any house, and then either side of it, either house on either side has benefics,
Yeah, that's a
it
Shubha
basically,
Katari. Yeah, Shubha
yeah,
Katari.
Shubha yoga, yeah, but it
Although,
literally,
although, although some people say that's only for the ascendant, but it's basically benefic hemming. Yes.
yeah, I look at it for anything personally.
Yes.
I think it's like, I mean, what an amazing idea that, like, it's just a simple, but I'm willing to bet very effective interpretative principle that, if you have what he's saying here, like, let's say you had Saturn in the 10th, but then you had like Jupiter on one side and Venus on the other, it's like, oh, the person's gonna, after experiencing some setbacks, they're probably gonna have like a tremendously successful
Yes.
career. Like, what a cool, super simple technique.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not only that, you can take that idea even further. If you have like a Yoga Karka planet, let's say a Venus Yoga Karka for Capricorn or Aquarius Lagna, and then
Yeah.
you have Jupiter and Mercury, a Mercury alone. Mercury. Let's say we have a super powerful Raja Yoga of I don't know Venus Venus in the I don't know Venus is there. I'm not you have Venus in
Yeah.
a quadrant, and then you have Jupiter to one side and Mercury to the other. That Raja Yoga is even going to be more powerful
Yeah.
because of this benefic hemming. So it's not only counteracting malefic effects, but it's also increasing benefic effects without a doubt.
Yeah. Yeah. Really, really, I love these two shlokas. So, all right, cool. Well, on to the next chapter, Judgment of Houses, which is
These
really
this
useful.
is a great chapter.
Yeah,
This is
really useful.
like chapter 3. This is like you say, bread and butter, right? The
Yeah.
bread. This is
Yeah.
caviar. This is caviar
Yeah.
because here we really get an idea of the houses. and what they are, what they mean, and there are subtle hints to how he gets these meanings out. And I mean, do you want to read each one? Because I mean, it's not a long chapter, so I think
sure. Yeah, we could just read each one.
Yeah.
Sure. Physique, appearance, intellect, complexion of the body, vigor, weakness, happiness, grief, and innate nature are all to be guessed through the ascending sign. I like that it's translated as guessed. I just, for some reason, that's appropriate. But I think that for me, innate nature is like the most important one here, innate nature. And later on in the book, in a much later chapter, he does attribute either the spirit or the soul to the ascendant as well, which is also something we do find in some Hellenistic texts like the Liber Hermetis. It's like very clear that the ascendant is not just the body or like just the mind, but it's like this idea that it's like the spirit or soul's union with the body mind. So in a sense, the ascendant is like, we could, in comparison to the sun and moon, we could say that the ascendant is more the body.
Oh,
but
definitely.
I would say that the moon's the mind and the sun is more the soul or causal body. But I would say that the ascendant is in a sense a mixture of all three of those.
Yes, I can go with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's really like innate nature is a nice way to translate it too. Robert Zoller, who was a medieval revivalist of astrology from Europe,
He is.
He's still with us. Yeah. I don't know where he is, but he's somewhere. And he talked about it like he focused really heavily on the Latin terms that he found, which were like inganium. I think it was like inganium or something like that, which he translated as like talent and wit and skill, so it was like, but it's not, I don't know. I bring this, I'm not doing a good job of explaining this. Sorry. My point is that like it's like our innate being, like our innate nature is like our talents and our natural wit, our natural skill, so the first house is of course supremely important.
Yes, it is, because in the first, and what is the first house? The first house is the ascendant, is the lagna, is that first cusp, is that point in the eastern horizon that is rising, right? The ascendant.
Coming up,
It's ascending. And as it is ascending, the body is also ascending after 9 months of gestation.
Yeah.
And basically it's the birth. It's the Jataka, as the Sanskrit word means, the Yanma. It's
right.
Just the body, the vehicle by which you're going to experience your karmas and express your sanskaras is being born. And we have to, I want to say that in this part of the book, Parashara is not referring in any way to the modern idea of the alphabetical, the astrological alphabet, the idea
like Aries is the first house.
Yeah.
Taurus is the no, he's not. He's not.
He mentioned, well, let me say, he kind of alludes to it in the fifth, as we're going to read, but in almost all other houses, it's kind of difficult to extrapolate that, because people have to realize that this idea that the first house is like Aries and is like Mars is a very modern concept.
Yeah, absolutely. And another,
and you can see it here with the first house. I mean, what does Aries have to do with this? Well, maybe the idea that you're a baby and Aries is a child.
Sure.
You could, in a way, use it as a tertiary element to your interpretation, but not as a principle. It
just confuses me to think of Aries and the first house being the same, for example. That just confuses the hell.
There is a principle to it. There is a principle, but it's
I agree.
Tertiary. It's a tertiary element. Yeah.
Well, and you will see things like malefics in Cancer being difficult for the mother and like for nurturing. You will see the same in like Libra for marriage and stuff like that. But I haven't found that to be the case with like malefics in Leo for children, for example, so it's kind of a loose thing. But anyway, I also wanted to mention something very important, that we talked about this first house as the sign ascending, and from there we can extrapolate that it refers to the ascended masters in the New Age tradition as well. No, I'm just kidding, man.
Okay.
You're like giving me this look. Like, no, man, that was a joke. Okay. All right. Second house. Well,
I'm gonna do like Blavatsky. I'm gonna get a note from oh look, the ascendant wrote me a note. You're beautiful, thank you. Something like that. Yeah.
Okay, wealth, grains and food, family, death, enemies, metals, precious stones are to be understood through the second house.
This is very simple. You know, the second is the sustenance you need for the body, you know, and that's food, grains, that's water. I mean, food there also. I mean, grains.
And family too early on.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Family,
and not only that, not only early on, but the idea of sustenance is not only like food, it's not only liquid, it's also shelter, it's emotional caring, which we're going to see in the four also.
Yeah, self-esteem.
Yeah, and here is the idea of the family just giving you the money necessary to go to school, to have your clothes, to take care of you while you're a baby. But, you know, this idea extends a lot more than that, because usually, you know, when people are rich, you know, they're usually rich because their parents were rich or because their grandparents were rich. And you see here the idea of how family is so important to wealth and to your financial assets per se. And, you know, once again, you could relate this to Taurus in a way, you know, but it's a tertiary thing. It's not something that is very present, because Taurus is more about stability, about responsibility, and about management. But here is just the idea of wealth and sustenance you need from all points of view, you know, money wise. And this is also the first house of education. You know, this is the house of oral education, of preschool education. The idea of, you know, E, I, O, U, you're the vowels, you know, learning the numbers. You know, very simple stuff that your mother could teach you, or your family, through oral tradition, not necessarily through written studies.
Right, and I just want to say before we move on, I have no idea why he gives enemies for the second house.
Because it's a maraca.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Cool, yeah, because classically enemies is associated with the 6th and the 12th.
And let me say, I'm going to tell you something. I already did this study here. Do you know what's the most common word you're going to see in all these versions of the houses? Death.
Okay.
Here, and I mean, you can have it here entailed. You see death here in the second house. And he's going to use death for the 2nd, the 7th, the 3rd, the 8th, and
the 12th, I think.
The 12th.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's very funny, because when when I did these videos in my channel in Spanish, I was, you know, telling people, don't get scandalized by, you know, don't get sensational about the idea of how Parashara mentions death so many times. It's just a part of the thing.
Yeah.
Right? But he mentions death in like 5 of the 12 houses, which is, you know, it's very traditional. It's very old school in that sense.
Sure.
Do you imagine like one of these new age astrologers just mentioning death 5 times in 5 different house descriptions? It would be very funny, but yeah, whatever.
Yeah, it would be. Okay, cool. Yeah, 3rd house. From the 3rd house, know the following: Tilor, servants, brothers, sisters, initiatory instructions, journey, and parents' death.
There you go.
Tilor is?
I think this is a typo. I think it's Taylor's.
Oh, okay.
I looked it up.
Tailoring and stuff? Okay. Yeah, this is pretty simple. Initiatory instructions is similar to what this Jewish astrologer Ibn Ezra gives in his book, which is knowledge of the Torah. He says knowledge of the Torah for 3rd house.
I think this is the idea of a 1-7 relationship with the 9th.
Yeah.
You know, the idea that the 3rd is the beginning of that initiatory.
Yeah, definitely. And 3rd is that study of like the principles and the concepts, exactly. And like, whereas the 9th is like the surrender and the actual embodiment of the wisdom or that kind of a thing. The faith itself, you know, that can come from studying text. Usually they come at the same time, but
it's the idea of little ideas versus the big ideas. And, you know, the 3rd house is very important, because once you were born in the 1st, when you have substance in the 2nd, in the 3rd, you know, gain the valor, you know, you gain the energy to fight in life, and the idea of going out in life, and, you know, gaining that sustenance for your own sake and your own way. And usually in traditional societies, well, brothers and sisters took a part in this and took a part in helping you doing this and you helping them. So this is the idea of all these meanings. And also very, very interesting, it's the idea of journeys, the idea of short journeys, which is also 1-7 relation to the 9, which are more like long journeys and pilgrimages. And parents' death. Once again, we see death here.
Yeah, 12th from the 4th, and taking the 4th is kind of collectively the parents. The 3rd
and
is
7th from the 9th, and 6th from the 10th. So you get a Maraka from the 9th father, and you get a Dushtana from the 10th father.
Yeah, and if 9th is like the house of Dharma par excellence, the 3rd is like what you, like how you embody that Dharma, what you do with it personally. And the same thing could be said of religion. The 9th deals with religion, faith in God. The 3rd deals more with like how you personally incorporate that into everyday life, you know, how you like your more personal relationship to God or religion, you know. So
and I always say that the 3rd is like the most underrated house.
It is. It's really underrated. Yeah, it's really important. And in Persian astrology, in a night chart, it's actually considered more important for the native's religion than the 9th house.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's really interesting. They do like this inversion thing that happens. And so like they'll say like if the north node is in the 3rd in a night chart, it's very good for the native's faith in God. But if it was a day chart, then you'd have the south node in the 9th, and that would be an indication that no, it's not really good for the native's faith and whatnot. Actually, I know somebody, I just realized I know somebody that has that condition where they have the night chart and they have the 3rd lord in the 3rd with Rahu or the north node. And actually they're not into like organized religion, but at the same time, like they are very much, you know, they use the term God, and they're, you know, they have faith in God and that kind of thing, as far as I can tell from the way they speak about it, you know. So really interesting. Yeah.
I mean, this chapter is really good. Really good. Yeah.
Cool. All right. 4th house, conveyances, relatives, mother, happiness, treasure, lands and houses. I think, you know, mother is really important here, but the two most important in this shloka are happiness and treasures to me, because happiness is like just that basic lunar happiness, that like peace of mind, that just enjoyment, having your needs met. And treasure is like, points to something kind of mystical, in my opinion. Like just in like Valens, Vedius Valens, the Hellenistic astrologer, talks about the 4th house as like one of its significations is something mystical, like mystical works and stuff. And so, and there's like a psychic attribute to the 4th as well by some of these authors. And so like treasure kind of like, to me, it kind of points to that. Maybe I'm using some circular logic here, forgive me, but no. Treasure, like what do you really treasure? Like what's that like secret, you know, the buried treasure?
You know,
I don't know why I'm doing this, but okay.
Once in the 3rd, where you got the energy and the valor to go out and reach your sustenance, in the 4th, you fall into the idea of a domestic life. You know, you buy a house, you buy land, as it says here. You buy conveyances that you're gonna like. You buy a car, you're gonna keep it in your garage, right?
Yeah.
And you're probably going to feel more motherly, more homely, and you're gonna have happiness and the treasure of having your own house, your own space. So it's basically the idea of the 4th of what it really means. It's just that space, you know. And also, you know, there's another word in Sanskrit for the 4th that I don't remember right now, but it's the idea that it's also used in Hellenistic astrology. It's the idea that it's hell. It's the Hades. You know, it's not in a negative way, but it's the idea of something that is hidden away.
Yeah, the underworld.
Yeah, exactly, the underworld. And usually that's alluded to the 8th, obviously, but this is the idea of the domestic, private life where you can rest, where you can be just in your underwear.
Yeah, totally.
Shirtless, and that's the happiness
or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and man, you know, I have the 4th lord. You know, 4th lord is also my ascendant lord. So, you know, I realize I'm a very, you know, domestic guy in many ways. So that's the real happiness, the real tranquility. It's just like being back in the womb of your mother, but the idea of the womb being your house. and domestic life. So really, this is the idea of the first of the kendras that we're going to discuss and why it's so important. So yeah, let's move on.
Okay. Yeah.
The fifth, I want to read this one.
Sure.
The fifth, the learned should deduce from the fifth. Learned. So if you're not learned, you're not going to understand this.
Yeah, just piss off.
Yeah. Just go and read some, I don't know, some Stephen King or something. So they learned should deduce from the fifth house amulets, sacred spells, learning, knowledge, sons, royalty, fall of position, etc. You get a lot of mixed things, and this is the only shloka that I could understand where he kind of uses this idea of Leo being like the fifth.
Yeah, totally. Like that power, that like kingly power to like
royalty. Yeah, royalty.
To like affect your life and change your life through like amulets and spells and mantras and stuff. Like, I think that I'm gonna really start employing this more when I think about the fifth house.
Well, usually the fifth means three things. It means three things, and it's basically, obviously, children. We know that, right? It's the putra sthana.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The idea of the children. The second one, it's the education, right? The idea that for me, this is how I use educational in houses. I use 4 houses for education. You have the second house for like
oral,
school, oral education. You have the fourth for elementary education. Elementary school, 1 through 5th, 6th grade, and the fifth, it's like intermediate education, but it can be like high school and maybe a bachelor's degree. Simple university skills. Because today the university bachelor's is equal to the high school or intermediate diploma of 100 years.
Sure.
So it's that idea of that type of education. So those are 2. And the third one that I use, it's more like the idea of the initiatory rites in the third. It's the idea of becoming more aware of spiritual life, of becoming more aware of, this idea of purva punja, of the idea of past life credit, and how you are starting to realize, you fell into a domestic life in the fourth, and in the fifth you want to have children, you want to learn, and in a way through that initiatory steps of having children, of creating, right, of studying, you start to walk in a more spiritual path, right? This is why the fifth is at Trikona, and this is going to be like the first step towards that final goal in the 9th house, which is going to be like, postdoctoral superior studies, and obviously religion and graduation and all that.
Sure. That's interesting. Yeah, I do it slightly differently, but I like those ideas.
And the fifth is the mind also, with all those things that I've just said. Yes.
Well, yeah, the fifth is like the creative mind. Classically, the fourth is synonymous with Manas, which is the moon. And so you have like but Manas is just sort of that sensory input mind,
Yeah, the soul, the mind soul.
Yeah, but the fifth is more like a more deliberate kind of mind, a more inquisitive, creative mind. And as Ryan pointed out in one of his videos, Ryan Kurtzak, he was saying that like the fifth is the 12th from the 6th. And so it's like the ability to creatively solve problems, because it's the end of problems and struggles. And you can say too, the fifth can deal with healing, because it's the 12th from the 6th of disease, the end of disease.
Very true.
It's actually a very important house to look at for self-confidence and everything that comes with that, like healing, solving problems and so on. And, here we see again, amulets, talismans, sacred spells, mantras, stuff like this, the ability to like affect change in your life. And so actually a strong fifth house would denote somebody who would have natural success with things like mantras, spells, magical rituals, talismans. And then to figure out, what it might be, I think you got to do, you got to get the planets in there. Like what do the planets symbolize? Like Ketu symbolizes mantras, for example.
Yeah. And this is the idea also of Purva Punya, where you kind of have past life credit.
Yes. Purva Punya. Yeah.
Purva Punya.
Purva. Yeah. Okay, cool. So 6th house.
Here we go with the first of the difficult houses. Do you want you read this? I'll
sure.
read. You read the even one.
I've got 4 grahas in the 6. So.
Oh, that's horrible. that's like taking diamonds and putting them in a trash can. Oh,
yeah, but 3 of them are malefics. So,
yeah. Sleep on that side. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Maternal uncle, doubts about death, enemies, ulcers, stepmother are to be estimated from the 6th house. So this isn't one of the better shlokas here. It's really it doesn't really capture to me.
Yeah, I mean the sixth is just the first Dushtana, and it's the least of. I think it's the least difficult of the Dushtanas because it's also
yeah. It's an upachaya. Yeah,
it grows with time, but usually the 6th is just you have it here. Doubts about death. Once again, death. And what's doubts about death? It's basically
like worry over
illnesses or worries that might come from illnesses that you get, enemies, obviously. This is the first, once you realize that you've learned, you want to have children, and you kind of have that initiatory thing in the 5th and the 6th, you realize that there are other people in the world that want the same things you want.
Yeah.
Life, you have your first encounter with mortality. And, ulcers is basically a sickness, an illness. And it's very funny because here you have stepmother, which kind of makes sense because it's the how do you figure this one out? There's got to be a bad baban reason why this is the stepmother.
Stepmother, okay, yeah.
This is the 4th from the 3rd. It's also the 7th from the 12th. And it's also the
it's the
9th from the 10th. There you go. So it's the wife of the father, or like the marriage, because 9th is like the initiatory marriage. It's like
yeah. So I've heard that opinion. I can't really say.
I'm trying to figure it out through Baba.
I would say because it's the 3rd from the 4th, which is the mother, and like a stepmother is kind of like.
Well, yeah, your wife died, so then you marry her sister. Yeah,
stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That happened commonly, I think, didn't it?
Oh yeah, I had an ex-girlfriend that I wanted to sleep with, like all her sisters. So yeah, that makes sense. I never told her that, but yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's funny! Wow.
Yeah, but that was a long time ago.
Yeah, sure. That was like when you were like just like a year ago, right?
No. This was like 10 years ago. Actually.
Yeah, no, I figured. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, that's the idea of traditional societies where oh, my wife died, I'm gonna marry her sister, which is more or less the same. But the idea that what I wanted to say is that the idea of the evil stepmother might come from this idea of the 6th house. The idea that evil stepmother is an enemy through this 6th house signification.
Yeah, and the 6th is really like, if you have a strong 6th house, you can like destroy and conquer any enemies and obstacles, and like it's a house where you're challenged to like really improve yourself by like. Have
you been able to destroy all your enemies?
Oh yeah, man! I got pikes in the back with all their heads mounted.
Okay, great. I have Rahu. I have Rahu in the 6th, just like you. So.
Well, but I will say this: it's not that I've like ever had to destroy my enemies, but like all the
just work out for you. Yeah.
Yeah, enemies that I've had in the past, like difficulties and challenges as well. Like a lot of them just evaporate after not like a Jupiter kind of evaporation, but the kind of evaporation that comes from just like getting my shit together and taking action, like because I have Saturn and Mars and Rahu there. So it's just interesting to observe. And I did have like many enemies growing up in like middle school and high school, but they like I don't have any enemies. Like I haven't had enemies for years and years and years. So.
And another thing that I want to mention is that, as you can see by the 6, that you scroll down, but the 6, there's no. Oh no, I'm sorry. It's that the 7th shloka is the 6th house. Oh, I'm sorry. That's confusing, by the way.
Yeah.
But that there's no mention of Virgo here. I mean.
Yeah.
You can't really. I mean, you could in a tertiary way once again, but.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's move on to the 7th. Do you want to read that one?
Sure. Wife, travel, trade, loss of sight, death to be known from the 7th. Loss of sight is actually a pretty common one because it's opposite the ascendant, and that works pretty well, I think. Wife, yeah, no brainer.
Obviously.
I and thou. Travel makes sense because like the 7th is like something over there, like out there where you haven't been, that's unfamiliar. So I think that works really well as too. It's like where you're headed, like ascendant, who you are, 7th, like where you're going.
And it's very weird because when you try to explain this to clients, the idea of the 7th being both interpersonal relationships and travel, they kind of don't get it. And you know,
that's why I don't explain it to them.
No, because if you're gonna make a prediction, I mean, if
I
there's
don't
not
explain
a lot of
why I'm making the prediction.
No. But I mean, if there's a prediction where you have no confluence in the 7th,
yeah,
interpersonal relationships, it can also be a trip.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sure.
So you got to explain that because everybody wants to know about their sex life. You know, everybody wants to have orgies all the time. So, you know, you got to explain them that when it's not that strong, you're probably going to have a trip or something instead of just having a partner.
Sure. Makes sense. Yeah. Okay, cool. So 8th
That's
house.
a no-brainer, by the way. That's and once again, death. Once again, you know, the idea of being a maraca, which
opposite to the house of life. So
which is purely a Jyotish term. I don't think there's such a thing in Hellenistic astrology as a maraca house.
I don't think so.
So the 8th house indicates longevity, battle, enemies, forts, wealth of the dead, and things that have happened and are to happen. I love that one.
Yeah, in past
things
and future.
That have happened and are to happen. You know, we come to the second Dushtana, which once again, you know, and when you analyze the Dushtanas, they all have their quirks. And the 8th is probably the most intense house. You know, the 8th is like an infinity stone. It's very powerful, but it depends who wields it, right? Because it's an impressionable house and its results are going to be deemed from the Graha or the Lord by which the 8th is associated with.
Yeah.
If it's with a positive one, it's going to be positive, but it's going to be intensely positive. Not necessarily like in abundance, but in the idea that, you know, you're going to have a sudden up and down that's going to turn out okay, hopefully. But if it's a malefic, then it's going to be intensely negative. So
yeah, and I think of the 8th as kind of like I think of like Rahu as one of the natural karakas of the 8th.
That makes sense.
I also think
because you don't know what's going to happen. Yeah,
and Saturn, of course, but also Rahu for like the more occult, strange aspect of it. And then it's like I really liken it to the Devil card in the tarot as well. Like it has a very, but also the Tower and even the Death card. Like it's all three of those for sure. But you have this like taboo side of things, which is very much the Devil. You know, like it's the 12th.
I would say I would associate to the Wheel of Fortune card.
Really?
Yeah, you know, the 8th. Yeah, because the 8th has a lot to do. Well, the studies I've read has a lot to do with lotteries. You know, and you know, it's just like a Russian roulette. Okay. I mean, if you're gonna get the bullet, you're probably gonna get the Devil or the Tower. But if you get in association with something else in the long run, it's going to be a positive one.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, because it does have a lot to do with wealth, like inheritance, like inheriting wealth from the dead, for sure. But yeah, the 8th house is like very much the house of like anything taboo and forbidden because it's the 12th from the 9th, the Dharma Bhava. So it's like a Dharma, but it's also the feet of the Guru. Again, 12th from the 9th, you know, things like this. So the 8th is a really complex house. And I find that the Vedic astrologers, especially the ones from India that I know, like they have, the Vedic astrologers have a healthier relationship with interpreting
definitely
than Western and like even Persian Muslim astrologers because it's pretty much very negative in the Persian medieval traditions. And in Indian tradition, it's like, oh, 8th house makes good astrologers. It makes people with like occult powers, you know, that have cities. It makes for like, you know, people that have hidden knowledge, that find buried treasure, kind of like the 4th, you know, that, but it also does make for kind of like angry, and it can make for like angry, wretched people who are overwhelmed by vicissitudes and enemies as well. So it's one of those things where like we see, you know, like the 8th and 12th, especially where in like the charts of great artists and musicians, right? We see that they have like this mystical occult attunement. and they're making this amazing music and art, but they also tend to like suffer and be drug addicts or cut off their own ears or something, like Van Gogh. So, it's really interesting. Yeah.
And once again, here you have the idea that it's the second Dushtana because he talks about battles and enemies. And in a way, in the sixth, you meet your enemy. In the sixth, you meet the idea that there's obstacles and debts. And in the seventh, you want to share your life with other people. And in the eighth, you realize that life is unpredictable.
Yeah.
And you want to live long to enjoy your new partner that you met in the seventh. And that's why the eighth, that's why you can justify it. The eighth has to do a lot with longevity. And the eighth is very important in calculating Ayu, or longevity. Of course, everybody talks about calculating Ayu, but nobody talks about how to do it specifically.
Yeah, I know. I think a strong eighth house and a strong Saturn show a strong immune system.
Yes.
Generally speaking, so that's one way.
Saturn positions are tricky because some people say something and other people say other things. I think it's the idea of thinking more than anything else, but by position of houses, you kind of get pros and cons wherever he is.
Yeah,
but,
agreed.
That's the eighth, and once again, the eighth sometimes is considered the house of astrology.
Yeah,
and it's the house of rich money from the death because it's the second from the seventh. So it's the money of other people, and also the second from a maraca. So the richness from the house that kills. So that's how you learn astrology, guys. This is Babat Baban. Yeah.
Right, but traditionally though, like before this text, like Yavanajataka and the Hellenistic tradition do give death to the eighth house.
Yes.
More than to the seventh or the second. Although the seventh too has been associated with death and disease in Hellenistic and medieval tradition.
And people have to realize that the eighth and the seventh are death because that's where sunsets occur.
Yeah, that's why. That's really the main reason. Yeah. Cool. Ninth house. Fortunes, wife's brother, religion, brother's wife, visits to shrines, and that's it. Et cetera. So that's it, guys. All right, on to the 10th house. This isn't a very important house. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no, the idea is that in the eighth, you want to live long, and in the ninth, you are reborn. In the ninth, you really know what religion is, what your philosophical outlook in life is. You start to realize the big picture in life.
What your duties are, like in terms
and that's
of
where you
traditional caste.
Yeah, that's where you meet your guru. That's where you really learn. And this is, for me, the house of superior studies. Doctorals, masters, postdoctorals, research.
Yeah, higher studies, and it can also be esoteric studies, especially. Especially when like the 8th or the 12th lord are somehow involved, or Ketu or Rahu, because it's like this notion that you're studying something very arcane that's not for many people, and that is going to bring you more into like a metaphysical, esoteric dimension as well.
And let's explain wife's brother because it's the 7th from the 3rd, and brother's wife because once again it's the 3rd from the 7th from Lagna. So
right. I think you reverse those, right? Wife's brother because it's from the 7th.
Yes, I'm sorry.
And brother's wife because it's the 7th from the 3rd.
Yes. I'm sorry. You're totally.
So you can do this for all of the houses though. Like 9th is the 12th from the 10th, so it represents the end of a job, the end of karma, the end of work, right? So in that sense, the 9th house could be actually a little bit negative at times when compared with the 10th house, right? Just like
it's apoklima.
And the 5th is the 8th from the 10th, so sudden changes or problems with career and public life.
And here we have the idea of the father from the 9th, and the idea that the father from the 9th is the father as a teacher figure. This is the father as somebody who gives you counsel, who teaches you things,
and who you get your like status from. The 9th being about dharma, like, and about caste and stuff. It's like who you get your and fortune,
your bloodline.
Who do you get your fortune from? Typically, your through your name and all that is the father in many cultures, and in India. So it's really interesting. Like when I first started working with that, I was like, I don't know, this doesn't make sense. But now I mostly use the 9th as the father. Yeah.
Because as we're going to see in the 10th, that says royalty, I think that's a typo, and it says palace.
Oh, I thought it meant like place in society, but
well, place. Okay, place, profession, honor, father, living in foreign lands. That's are to be understood from the 10th. You know, the 10th house is probably the second most important house in a chart because it's the highest point from where you are.
It's really important, yeah.
And it's the idea that when there's the highest point, you kind of gotta look up and you gotta raise your face, and there's like an act of being pious towards something big and powerful. And in the 10th, basically it's honor, it's your profession, it's your career, it's your place. And the father from the 10th, it's the idea of the father as an authoritative figure, as a power figure.
Like a Saturnic figure, you know, teaching you like discipline and limitations.
Yes. Because once you graduated in the 9th and you realize religion, you realize Dharma, you realize Guru, not into terms of achieving it, but, you know, realizing from a point of view of your mind. In the 10th, you want to work for it. You want to really distinguish yourself. It's like, look at me. I've done this till now. Now I'm going to do something in society. And that's the idea of the 10th, you know. And also the 10th are power figures, you know, your boss, authority figures like the government, bureaucracies, and all that.
Yeah, and actually, much more classically, the 9th was associated with kings because of the divine right of kings. So, but I think more now, and maybe even back then, you know, that was ceasing to be the reality, I think, for the kings. So, so it became more of a 10th house thing, appropriately so. But like god emperors used to be, you know, that was the 9th, god emperor, you know.
The Chakravartin.
Yeah, Chakravartin. Yeah, cool. Okay, 11th house. All articles, son's wife, because it's the 7th from the 5th. Income, 2nd from the 10th, right? Prosperity, quadrupeds are to be understood from the 11th. You know, this is really the house of like gains.
The 11th is the simplest house. You know,
what do you gain from working, right? What do you gain from karma bhava, doing work? 10th house. You gain the 11th. So if your 11th is stronger than your 10th, man, that's great. You don't have to work that hard, and your gains are going to be, you know. But if it's the other way around, that's a person who has to work, and it's not a have to. It's that they believe that, because the chart and the bhavas means mental states. Basically, it's a picture of the mind. So you're basically saying, well, you have to work harder to gain stuff because that's what you believe. You know. That's what the chart is saying. You're most likely to think that, oh, I can't gain all this stuff unless I work really, really hard. Whereas other people, kind of like me, are like, oh, I'm lazy. I don't want to work that hard. And like, you know, I think I should gain more for working less. So,
well, yeah, that's the dream, right? That's the dream. But you know, the 11th is the easiest house to understand. You're just reeking the money you get from the 10th point.
Yeah.
And it's just a house of gain.
Yep.
It also relates, you know, to the idea of older brothers. It also relates to the idea of hopes and aspirations and recognitions.
Yep.
And also your circle of friends.
I think of it psychologically as the ability to be open to the good things that life will bring you. And
yeah.
Yeah, in that sense too, it's in alignment with the Hellenistic tradition of saying it's the good spirit. It was the tradition of the good spirit. Yeah. In Hebrew it's like Itzhak Tov and Itzhak Ra, and like we're gonna see that the I think it's Itzhak Tov is, I think, the good spirit, and Itzhak Ra is the bad spirit, the 12th house. So again, angel and devil on your shoulder. But psychologically, it's really just more like, are you open to the guidance and the goodness that can come with life, and like seeing things as, you know, steering you toward an auspicious path? Or are you like paranoid and shut down and like afraid and like closed? That's more the 12th house. So let's read that house. From the 12th house, one can know about expenses, history of enemies, and one's own death. And I think expenses is really the key to understanding it, like letting go of things, expending energy, right? And it's also been called the house of bed pleasures, like an orgasm, right? Like you release that release. And it's the house of moksha par excellence. All the watery houses 4, 12, and 8 are moksha houses, meaning release, final liberation, enlightenment, because you're letting go. You know, you're you're expending, and that's a letting go, you know.
And the 12th is just the end.
Yeah.
You know, it's basically that. And this can be expenses, this can be death, this can be just, you know, turning the page. And because once you go through all these stages of the houses after the 11th, when you get your gains, well, you got to spend them. And that's where the 12 comes in, but you spend everything and you die. So, yeah, I mean, and once again, death. You know, death is the most common word that Parashara uses to describe all the houses. So this is, now that we finished this idea before we go to the prosperity annihilation, this is another reason why it's not recommended for beginners to just go ahead and read the
classics.
The classics, because, you know, if you are you know, I don't want to be negative, but if you are very bubbly about it, very naive about it, then you're going to read these things and you're going to come out, you know, like shit. You're going to be
scared,
let down. You're going to be scared. You're going to have very low self-esteem.
Yeah.
And because, you know, astrology, and, you know, I remember when I started reading astrology, I remember like reading these things, you know, a couple of years ago, and like, I'm not understanding. And there was a voice, don't worry, you're going to understand later on. And okay, let's go on. Let's read another thing.
Cool.
And you got to fall into the energy of the astrological lore. You got to fall into the zone to understand these things. So, you know, don't feel discouraged because of this, because I've kind of seen this through my channel of how people react to these things in a rather negative way, you know.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So prosperity or annihilation of a house. I personally don't want to go too deep into this because he's going to talk about all these things like later, you know, the avashtas and all that stuff. But it's basically the idea that, you know, if a house or its lord is associated with benefics in other good houses and in good avashtas, which are basically planetary states, which he spends like a whole chapter on later, right, in its own sign, in its exaltation, right, or in any of the avashtas that are more potent as far as what are called the Baladi Avashtas, which again talk about those more in depth later. But
yes, those are problematic. But yes,
then a house does. Then the things signified by a house come to fruition, are stable, bring happiness, and so on. Whereas if it's, you know, if the Lord is
Lars.
Anyway,
I have it right here. So if you want me,
go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
You know, there are two ways of knowing the annihilation of a house or the prosperity of a house. Basically, 5 points. You know, if you have conjunction by a benefic planet or Rashi aspect from a benefic planet, it's positive, especially if it's Mercury or Jupiter. If the house lord is in Yuva or Kumara Avashta, which we're going to be discussing later on, which is basically in a young or adult avashta, it's good because the young and the adult can do things in the world. If the house lord is in Jagrada Avashta, which means awakened, that's a positive dignity, then it's good. If the house lord is in the 10th house, then there's a promise of greatness, so that's good. And if the house is aspected by its lord, it's also good. And those are basically a series of 6 points.
Yeah, okay.
Most points you get, the better. It's just like the dignities in Hellenistic astrology. And then you have the opposite, which would be the annihilation. It's basically if the house lord is with a negative, conjunct with a negative malefic planet, I mean, then if the house lord is Bridya or Mridya Bashta, which means old or death state, you can't really do anything when you're old or death. And we're going to be discussing Bashtas later on. Then if the house lord is Sushupti Avashta, basically Sushupti means like sleep. That's a very negative, that's a bad dignity point.
Yeah.
There's another one that is Swapta Avashta, which is like sleepy. There it's kind of between Jagrat and Sushupti, between awaken and asleep.
Yeah.
Then the fourth one is if the house lord is defeated in planetary war. That usually doesn't happen, but when it happens, it has an effect.
Yeah.
If the house is not aspected by its lord, you know, the helper of the house, not looking after its house, it can be negative. And if the house lord is in an evil house, you know, this could be a Dushtana, although some people also add the Trishalayas.
Santanam appears to have added the 11th here, but I think that's, well, yeah, and the third I would agree with, but I don't think the 11th is actually in this shloka. I'm
Yeah,
willing to
because
bet it's
once
not.
again, I'm not going to correct Santanam because I'm
Yeah,
not going
yeah,
to do that.
yeah.
But there is a big, I mean, there is a confusion with the third and the 11th. You know, the Dushtanas are one thing and the Trishadayas are another thing. Trishadayas are not inherently evil. And there's no such thing as an evil house. They're just difficult houses. And that's the 6th, the 8th, and the 12th. But the 11th and the 3rd are Trishadayas in that they destroy combinations for greatness. It doesn't have to do with health. It doesn't have to do with your debts, with debts as in money and death as in dying. You know, it doesn't have to do with that. It just has to do with interfering with your possibility of becoming great in life.
Yeah, and man, like we're gonna save that conversation for that chapter, but I have a real issue with that idea.
No, but I mean we're on the same page because I don't think the 11th is a bad house.
No, but even for the yoga judgment, like I really question it. So it'll be fun to talk about that when we get there. But
you're gonna question the idea of the 11th and 3rd?
Oh yeah, big time.
And you think it's negative, or I mean, you think it's positive?
I think it's overrated. I think this idea that those can like cancel Raj Yogas and that the Raj Yogas deal with like personal greatness as well. I think these are modern interpolations, basically.
Well, I don't think they can cancel them out, but they're gonna be more difficult.
Sure, that might be true. Yeah, and we'll talk about it when we get there. But
yeah, no. I mean, let me rephrase that. I'm not being absolutist about it.
Yeah.
Once we get there, once we get to that bridge, we'll cross it. But that's the idea of annihilation. And let me tell you, these are very good precepts. And how I was taught to analyze houses. But yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, very simple stuff. Of course, it's never one-dimensional. Usually, you'll have like, good and bad in a house, and you have to deduce like what's stronger, so to speak. But even if you have good and bad, right? So good and bad, you have like, you may have like a 7th house promising like a really amazing like love affair relationship, but then you have some malefic influence that means it's not going to last very long. It's like, okay, it's not the end of the world, right? Like it was an experience and you experienced it, and it was, it's what you make of it. So that's kind of what we're getting into, not so much whether or not it's like, oh, is this good or bad, but is this like, what are the dimensions here? You gain money, you lose money, you have a kid and you love the kid's great, but the kid creates a lot of poverty in your life for the first 5-6 years until you get it together and your finances flow, but whatever, like it's life anyway. So
by the way, that's a nice shirt.
Thanks. Thank you. Yeah, a friend gave it to me a while ago. Cool. Well, man, yeah, it's been good.
So far, so good. We're doing this little by little. It's okay.
Yeah, I think that, that sums up everything in these chapters, or the salient points, I should say. And so don't forget to, hit like and subscribe and check out Fernando's channel and website as well and all that good stuff. And, we'll be back with another episode soon. So until then, arrivederci.
Arrivederci.